Have you ever found yourself wondering why some people just don't seem to take you seriously, no matter how much you've done for them? Maybe you've been the dependable one, the one who shows up, helps out, always says yes. Yet when it comes to respect, it feels like you're invisible. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know, you're not alone. And more importantly, it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. Respect isn't something we're given automatically with age. It's not a reward for kindness or a badge you earn by putting others first. In fact, sometimes the more we give of ourselves, the less others value us. That's a tough truth, I know, but there's something powerful in recognizing it. Because once you understand that respect starts with you, with how you carry yourself, with what you allow and what you let go of, well, everything begins to change. And that's what we're here to talk about today. In this video, we're going to have an honest heart-to-heart conversation about 6 habits that might be quietly holding you back from being truly respected. These aren't just surface-level behaviors. They're subtle patterns that chip away at your dignity, your self-respect, and the way others see you, sometimes without you even realizing it. But once you learn to recognize them, and more importantly, remove them, you'll start to notice a shift. People begin to listen more. They show up differently around you. And maybe most importantly, you begin to stand a little taller in your own skin. Let's start right at the beginning, with something we've all done more times than we'd like to admit, making excuses. Now, I want to be gentle here. Life throws curveballs at all of us. Illness, family emergencies, bad weather, traffic, there are always things that get in the way. But here's the hard truth. No one respects a person who's always got a reason for why they didn't follow through. The world doesn't reward excuses, it rewards results. And that's not about being perfect. It's about being accountable. I remember a time in my life when I was constantly running late. I'd always have what I thought were good reasons, unexpected phone calls, slow elevators, the usual. But what I didn't see back then was how people around me were slowly losing faith in me. Friends started inviting me less. My grown kids stopped asking for my help with things. And at first, I didn't get it. I thought I was just unlucky or misunderstood. But really, I had become unreliable in their eyes, and that hurts to admit. What I eventually realized is that every time I made an excuse, I was saying, "This wasn't my fault," which sounds like a defense. But really, it's just a way of stepping back from responsibility. And people can sense that. It's not about whether the excuse is true, it's about whether you own your actions. And I'll tell you something else. When I started doing the opposite, when I showed up and said, "I messed up. I'm sorry I was late. I'll plan better next time," the tone shifted. People appreciated the honesty. They forgave faster. And they started to see me as someone who wasn't perfect, but who could be trusted. That's what respect is built on. Not perfection, but reliability. It's okay to fall short sometimes, but don't pass the blame. Take the wheel of your own life again. Now, there's another habit that goes hand in hand with excuses, and that's laziness. And before you think, "That doesn't apply to me, I'm always doing something," let me say this. Laziness isn't always about lying on the couch. Sometimes laziness shows up as mental drifting, avoiding the harder conversation, brushing off tasks that challenge us, procrastinating on things we know would make our lives better. I used to think that slowing down after retirement was something I earned, and it is in many ways. But there's a difference between resting and disengaging from life. Laziness can sneak in when we stop challenging ourselves. When we say, "I'm too old to change," or "It's not worth the effort," what we're really saying is, "I don't believe in myself anymore." And that right there is what drains respect, not just from others, but from ourselves. I remember working on a small project with a group of neighbors, repainting an old community sign. Everyone was pitching in, and I showed up thinking I could just hold the ladder or pass brushes around. But one of the ladies looked at me and said, "Don't sell yourself short. We could use your hands on this." It shook me. Not because it was harsh, but because it reminded me I'd started to accept a smaller version of myself. I'd stopped trying, not because I couldn't, but because I'd convinced myself it didn't matter. But it does matter. People notice when you give your best, and they also notice when you don't. There's a quiet power in effort. It says, I care, I'm still growing, I take pride in what I do. And that's something people deeply respect, especially as we get older. It's not about chasing goals or proving anything. It's about showing that your spirit is still awake and active, that you haven't given up on life or on yourself. If you've been feeling like you've lost a bit of your spark, ask yourself, when was the last time I challenged myself, really challenged myself? Not with something grand or impressive, but with something meaningful. Maybe it's learning a new recipe, fixing something around the house, writing that letter you've been putting off. It could be as simple as going for a walk even when you don't feel like it. Every small act of effort is a declaration of worth. And when others see that you still care, still push, still engage, they can't help but admire it. You inspire more than you realize, just by showing up with intention. You become the kind of person people look to, not because you talk the loudest or have all the answers, but because you lead by example. Respect isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It walks quietly, with steady steps and a clear head. And it starts the moment you stop waiting for people to respect you and start respecting yourself enough to let go of what's weighing you down. Now that we've touched on how excuses and laziness silently erode the respect we receive, it's time to look at something else. Something most of us overlook, but it shapes how the world sees us before we even open our mouths. It's how we present ourselves. And I'm not just talking about fashion or grooming. I'm talking about the message we send the world before we even say a word. You see, I used to think that caring too much about appearance was shallow. I figured if people couldn't accept me in my comfortable clothes and worn-out sneakers, well, that was their problem. But over time, I started to notice something. When I didn't put in the effort, when I looked like I just rolled out of bed and wandered through the day, people didn't seem to take me seriously. It wasn't that they were mean or judgmental. It's just that I wasn't showing up like someone who respected himself. And if I didn't show that, how could I expect anyone else to? There's a difference between looking fancy and looking intentional. You don't need expensive clothes or a fresh haircut every week. You just need to care. Clean, well-fitting clothes. A neat appearance. Holding yourself with confidence. These little things speak volumes. They say, I'm still here. I value myself. And I value your time enough to show up fully. I remember one afternoon at a local community meeting. I was wearing a clean, pressed shirt for once. Nothing special, just something I hadn't thrown on from the laundry basket. A woman sitting next to me struck up a conversation. Later, she admitted that she hadn't expected much when I'd first come to the meetings in sweatpants and a baseball cap. But something shifted in her when I started dressing like I cared. And funny enough, I started to care more too. My ideas were taken more seriously. People made room for my voice. And that wasn't about vanity. It was about the respect that grows when you walk in looking like you mean business. How we carry ourselves on the outside often reflects how we feel on the inside. So if your reflection has been telling you lately that you've let things slide, maybe it's time to take a gentle look inward, not with shame, but with honesty. Ask yourself, do I like how I'm showing up in the world? And if the answer is no, the good news is you can start shifting that today, with one small decision at a time. Now, there's another area where respect is either built or broken, and it has to do with the invisible lines we draw between ourselves and others. I'm talking about boundaries. And I'll be honest with you, this one took me a long time to understand. I grew up believing that being available, involved, and always there was what made you a good friend or a good parent. But somewhere along the way, I crossed into overstepping. I offered advice when no one asked. I checked in a little too often. I assumed people wanted my input because my intentions were good. What I didn't realize was that I was smothering people, especially the people I loved. I confused closeness with control. I thought, if I don't say something, they might get hurt. If I don't remind them, they'll forget. If I don't check in, they'll feel neglected. But the truth was, they needed space. They needed to handle things their own way. And my constant involvement didn't feel like love. It felt like pressure. One of the hardest moments came when a close friend of mine gently told me she needed distance. I was shocked. I thought I was being helpful. But what I saw as caring, she experienced as crossing a line. That conversation stayed with me for a long time. Not because she was harsh, but because she was right. Boundaries aren't rejection. They're not cold or distant. They're a sign of emotional maturity. And when we respect someone's boundaries, we're saying, I see you. I hear you. I honor your space. That builds real trust, and real trust always leads to respect. It's the same the other way around too. When you set boundaries for yourself, whether it's with your time, your energy, or your emotional availability, you teach people how to treat you. You stop overcommitting. You say no when something doesn't feel right. And you stop bending yourself into someone else's mold just to avoid conflict. That's not selfish. That's wise. And if you've spent decades putting everyone else first, I know this might feel uncomfortable at first. But let me reassure you, setting boundaries doesn't push people away, it brings the right people closer. Because now they know you're honest. They know you have limits. And they know that when you say yes, you mean it. There's this quiet confidence that grows inside of you when you stop trying to manage everyone else's experience. You begin to feel lighter, calmer, more at peace. And as that peace settles in, so does your strength. That's the kind of strength people respect. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that lives calmly in its own skin. And yet, there's one more habit that might be doing more damage than you realize, especially if you've ever worked in a team, led a group, or helped someone achieve something meaningful. It's the habit of taking credit for something that wasn't fully yours. I know this might sound like something that only happens in office politics or corporate boardrooms, but it shows up in everyday life too. Maybe you tell the story in a way that makes your role seem a little bigger. Maybe you forget to mention the help someone gave you. Or maybe you stay silent when the praise comes in, even though you know someone else deserves it more. It doesn't have to be malicious to do harm. It just has to be consistent. Because the truth is, people notice. They may not say anything the first time, but they remember. And slowly they stop trusting your words. They stop seeing you as fair or generous. And once that perception settles in, it's hard to shake off. I once did this early in my career. I was part of a community project, and during the final presentation, I spoke in a way that subtly made it seem like I had done more than I actually had. I didn't lie, but I also didn't go out of my way to give credit where it was due. I thought it would help me stand out. But all it did was isolate me. One of the team members pulled away after that. I didn't know why at first, but in time, I understood. I had broken something fragile between us. Trust. And the thing is, it didn't feel good. Even with the compliments I received, there was this uncomfortable feeling in my chest. Because deep down, I knew the praise wasn't entirely mine. I'd stolen a piece of someone else's effort. And that's not how respect is built. When you give credit freely, something beautiful happens. People see that you're secure, that you're generous, that you value fairness. And that draws others in. It makes them want to collaborate with you, support you, stand by you. That kind of respect lasts a lifetime. And let me tell you, especially at this stage in life, there's nothing more freeing than knowing you don't need to steal the spotlight to be seen. You just need to be honest, fair, and real. That's more than enough. But even when you do everything else right, there's one habit that can undo it all in a matter of seconds. One habit that will make people walk on eggshells around you, question your judgment, and quietly distance themselves, even if they still smile in your direction. It's being emotionally reactive. Now, I know emotions run deep, especially as we get older. Life has given us joys and heartaches, wins and regrets. We've carried burdens, loved deeply, lost people, and weathered more storms than most younger folks can imagine. So yes, we feel things strongly. And that's not a weakness. That's being human. But here's where the line is drawn. When those feelings start controlling our actions, when we lash out, shut down, get defensive, or spiral into anger or sadness so quickly that it unsettles those around us, that's when respect begins to slip away. I'll be honest, I've been there. There was a time when I'd get offended easily. Someone would criticize me, maybe gently, maybe not, and I'd react before I even had time to think. Raise my voice. Say something cutting. Walk away in a huff. I thought I was standing up for myself. But really, I was proving to everyone that I wasn't in control of me. And the worst part? Later, in the quiet of my room, I'd feel embarrassed, ashamed, and even more isolated than before. Because that moment of reaction didn't just hurt someone else, it hurt me. It pushed away the connection I truly wanted. It chipped away at how people saw me. Not because they didn't care about me, but because they couldn't trust me, at least not emotionally. Here's something I've learned over the years. You may not always be able to control what happens around you, but you can always control how you respond. That space between what happens and how you react, that's your power. That's your strength. When you take a breath instead of barking back, when you pause and listen before defending yourself, when you walk away, not to escape, but to protect your peace, you're sending a message to everyone around you. A quiet, powerful message. I am in charge of me. And let me tell you, people respect that. Deeply. You don't need to be cold or emotionless. That's not what this is about. It's about being grounded, being centered. When someone sees you staying calm under pressure, hearing criticism without falling apart, or handling conflict without drama, they see strength. Not the kind of strength that's loud or forceful, but the kind that comes from having done the inner work. From knowing who you are and refusing to let every little thing knock you off balance. There was a moment with my granddaughter not too long ago. She was upset with me. Something about a comment I made, a boundary I unknowingly crossed. In the past, I might have gotten defensive or tried to explain myself right away. But this time, I just listened. I breathed. And I said, I hear you. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I see that I did. I'll do better. She softened immediately. The energy shifted. And later, she told me that simple response made her feel more understood than a dozen arguments would have. That's the beauty of emotional maturity. It doesn't seek to win. It seeks to understand. And from that place, relationships heal. Respect grows. And you, my friend, become someone people trust, not just with their thoughts, but with their hearts. So as we bring all of this together, let's take a moment to reflect. Maybe some of these habits have crept into your life. Maybe you've noticed yourself making a few too many excuses lately. Or maybe you've let laziness creep in, not out of choice, but because life just started to feel heavier. Maybe you've downplayed your appearance, crossed someone's boundaries without realizing it, taken more credit than you should have, or let your emotions get the best of you once too often. If any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know this. It doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. But now that you see it, you get to choose what comes next. Respect isn't built in a day, but it begins the moment you decide to reclaim your integrity. The moment you say, I want to walk through the world with clarity, intention, and dignity. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but because you know you deserve to live with self-respect. And once you do, the world starts to mirror that back to you. People treat you differently because you treat yourself differently. They listen more closely, lean in more attentively, and trust more deeply. Because now they see you, not just as someone older, but as someone wiser, as someone worth looking up to. That's the gift of letting go of the habits that no longer serve you. You don't just gain respect, you gain peace. You gain strength. And you step into a version of yourself that perhaps you always knew was in there, just waiting for permission to shine through. So I'll leave you with this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. But if you live with honesty, effort, and grace, if you respect yourself enough to remove what weakens you and nurture what strengthens you, then the respect you've always deserved will find its way to you, quietly, steadily, and fully. Because real respect begins within, and it's never too late to claim it. If you found this message helpful, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share in the comments below your experiences, your reflections, or even the habit you're most ready to let go of. This community is stronger when we share with each other. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more conversations like this, practical, empowering, and grounded in wisdom that grows with age. Thank you for spending this time with me. Here's to living with strength, self-respect, and grace at any age. You deserve it, and you always have.